Hello, everyone, and welcome to the March AVERT webinar. My name is Nell Bennett, and I am the AVERT coordinator. I'm joining you today from the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to acknowledge any First Nations people who are joining us today. This morning, we have a very special presentation, and we're very lucky to have two presenters joining us today. Dr. Lauren Moulds of the Department of Human Services South Australia, of Deakin University and of the University of Adelaide, and John Young of the Department of Human Services South Australia and the University of Queensland. Lauren works as General Manager of the Exceptional Needs Unit in the Department of Human Services. This unit oversees the Inclusion Support Program, which is the subject of today's webinar. This program is South Australia's Countering Violent Extremism, or CVE, Therapeutic Intervention Program. John is the manager of the Inclusion Support Program. John has been responsible for the design, implementation, and growth of this program in South Australia. John is well regarded as a leader in innovative CVE practice. We are extremely lucky to have such experienced and knowledgeable practitioners with us today. John and Lauren will be taking questions at the end of their presentation. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You can type your questions in as they occur to you, and John and Lauren will address them at the end of the presentation. So John, Lauren, thank you so much for being with us. I'll leave it with you.
Thanks, Nell. And obviously I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to the Kaurna people and the Kaurna land, which we're presenting from today, and acknowledge the experience that we benefit from very, very much so in our work in the Exceptional Needs Unit and by extension in the Inclusion Support Program. Today, I'm just going to roll through a little bit about what we do in South Australia for our Countering Violent Extremism intervention. I'm going to work hard to kind of make sure I'm explaining a lot of terminology. Obviously, I get caught in our government sort of tunnel vision and forget that not everyone uses the same acronyms and shorthand that we do. But essentially, we'd like to talk to you today about, in South Australia, our sort of a needs-based approach to supporting our extremists and terrorist offenders over here through our Inclusion Support Program. So the context of the Inclusion Support Program, some of you might know it by various names. Obviously, Countering Violent Extremism, or CVE, is the acronym that we'll be using a lot today. Some of you will be aware that there's federal funding that sort of is extended to every jurisdiction to design and implement a CVE intervention approach according to each jurisdiction's own individual needs. And in South Australia, that funding is provided to our Department of Human Services, which other jurisdictions might sort of consider to be called a Department of Community Services or Communities and Justice, that sort of approach, broadly a human service approach. So obviously we execute the objectives of our Home Affairs funding, which is to provide a CVE intervention program to individuals vulnerable to radicalization, to violent extremism. And HRRR is a different acronym, stands for, it's a bit clunky, high risk reintegration and rehabilitation. So that just speaks to, I guess, a rehabilitation, reintegration stream of CVE intervention, where broadly speaking, Living Safe Together has had more of a prevention diversion focus, although I'll stress that that's really different in each jurisdiction. So I'm talking in very broad terms. Also, the South Australian government provides some funding to us in a few different streams. And so obviously acknowledging that this program will balance the pressures of both those larger federal goals and our specific goals in South Australia. We're quite unique in South Australia in that the CVE intervention fundings come through to the Department of Human Services. I think at the time it was probably a little bit of a happy accident when this funding sort of rolled out. I think in some jurisdictions it was very clear that CVE intervention needed to be led by police, and as such that funding was sort of given to police to design programs with those needs in mind. And I think at the time in South Australia, we had a very different context for these, for violent extremism. And notably at the time, it was broadly young people, sort of more of a prevention diversion focus. And it was generally coming out as behavioral issues with young people from sort of cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and partially those behavioral concerns being misinterpreted as violent extremist risk, and partially, some more complex stuff. So that was part of the reasoning why I went to the Department of Human Services, which at the time had the carriage of the Office for Youth and the Office for Multicultural Services. So it was really a community engagement, prevention, resilience building sort of approach at the time. And obviously it's grown to then, as the context across Australia has shifted, and obviously as we've matured in South Australia. Being in human services is really good because it allows us, first of all, it separates the two parts of CVE intervention. So one part is risk broadly, one part is need. Obviously, we're still very risk-minded and risk-focused and cognizant that we work within a complicated risk setting, but we're very well supported by our security and compliance agencies, SAPOL, Australian Federal Police, Corrections, Youth Justice, who they kind of have more of that emphasis on risk focus, and allows us to shift the scales to one side and be a more needs-based therapeutic approach. And I'm going to talk a little bit about service coordination as the slides go on. It's important to say, though, that it's not all roses being a needs-based program, because obviously the intelligence picture, the security picture, the risk picture is a really big part of the story of CVE intervention and extremist clients. Obviously, decisions are made about these individuals in terms of investigations, intelligence, how they're being charged, how they're being prosecuted, the evidence briefs that are put forward, sentencing, how those sentences are then executed in the correctional setting, and so on. And obviously, like, where there's more and more individuals being charged with terrorist offences, corrections are having a larger stake in the CVE intervention world, and obviously being up separate from those processes, we have much less advocacy and agency within those systems, and we have to kind of figure out where we fit in. And without going too deep into it, I think it's enough to say that there's a power dynamic there that, a human service agency has less of a say, if you want, at that table. In some ways, rightly so, because we're not a security agency, but obviously it's complicated when we're all trying to work with the same individuals. Our cohort in South Australia, I'd say it's more or less 50-50 prevention, diversion, and rehabilitation, reintegration. So we have about 40 clients in our different program streams, and that will sort of sometimes be 45, sometimes be 35, because we do exit people off the program and intake people in. They're mostly men, which won't be a huge surprise. That's pretty consistent with literature, pretty consistent with the justice setting altogether. Although obviously in this program, we've got broadly Caucasian men with extreme right-wing sort of ideological interests. That's our biggest cohort. Probably our second biggest cohort is people who are interested in mass violence, school shootings, and mass sort of public attacks. Those people, if they have any sort of ideological inclination, that tend to be sort of like right-wing as well, if any. And then we do have a little bit of Islamist sort of interest of that sort of stuff, although that hasn't been a huge feature of the South Australian experience. Some really interesting outliers. We've had not like a relatively high amount of Indigenous representation. Interestingly, for some of the Indigenous individuals who have come through our program, again, noting it's been in that prevention diversion stream, but there's been interests in white supremacy kind of narratives, which is obviously a really interesting concept, Indigenous person who's also a white supremacist. And we're working really close with our Nunga team. So that's led by, we have quite a good cultural support in the exceptional needs unit broadly, and the inclusion support program benefits from that. Just trying to provide a little bit of extra assessment and understanding about what's happening with these mostly young people that they're presenting with these behaviors. Just quickly as well, we have had a handful of trans individuals come through with really different presentations as well, which is, again, another interesting thing that we're trying to understand a little bit better. But going back to what we're seeing in the broad cohort is we're seeing a lot of disability needs. So we're seeing a lot of like really impaired functional capacity. We're seeing high rates of neurodivergence, whether that's ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, whether it's sort of developmental trauma and the sort of effects of that, which obviously the sector as a whole is trying to understand a bit better. And we see it as well as some complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are the most common sort of things that we see. Obviously, then there's flow-on mental health needs with our cohort. And the combination of the disability and mental health profiles means that there's quite significant functional impacts. And by that, I mean not your sort of activities of daily living, like, you know, toileting, eating, etc. Obviously, our clients tend to be fairly competent with that sort of stuff. They're presenting with more, I say subclinical. So they're unable to plan ahead, unable to budget, unable to plan a week's worth of shopping, unable to follow recipes. Those kinds of more instrumental activities of daily living is what we see. Stuff that they wouldn't normally be picked up on in the mainstream, but obviously it's something that simmers under the surface and leads to some unmet needs being met with some sort of maladaptive coping behaviors. Just quickly, I think it's worth just digging into this slide. Obviously, I've said a lot about this already, but I'll just run through where we are. So we're one of 4 programs of the Exceptional Needs Unit. Exceptional Needs Unit. I might get Lauren to run that sentence if that's all right, Lauren, just because you've got the better spiel in mind, and then I'll dive back in.
Yeah, g'day everybody, good morning. So the Exceptional Needs Unit is a statewide across the age range service which deals with individuals and families who have complex unmet need, are posing a risk to themselves, others of the community, and there's barriers or reasons why mainstream services can't meet those needs and manage those risks effectively. So we work in various different forms of programs, the ISP being one of them, to look at how we can navigate service response, coordinate the delivery and the cohesiveness of those services to better manage need and meet risk effectively.
Thanks, Lauren. And one of the main instruments or levers that the Exceptional Needs Unit pulls is service coordination, and that's consistent with the Inclusion Support Program, which is one of the 4 Exceptional Needs Unit programs. So just running through these quick things, we'll accept people, anyone over 10 years old across the age range, across the whole state. If they're under 10, obviously we still provide a certain response. It's not super common. We've had, I think, 1 or 2 under 10s referred to us through the life of the program. We conduct and fund and coordinate needs-based assessments in individuals at risk of radicalized and violent extremism. And when I say needs-based, so I'm talking about like forensic psychology sort of assessments, clinical assessments, occupational therapy assessments, those sorts of things. What we don't participate in South Australia, which again is a point of difference from other jurisdictions, is we don't lead risk assessments. So the ISP doesn't own a violent extremist risk assessment, or you might know it as a VERA. We don't conduct sort of TRAP 18s or lead them, although we might participate in those assessments where other agencies, which is normally corrections, policing, or forensic mental health agencies, will sit on those panels. But obviously, to lead a risk assessment of a client has a lot of implications. And the main one we're concerned about is that compromising of a therapeutic alliance with the client. So that's in there. We lead the therapeutic intervention part. And I said I'd talk about service coordination a little bit. So service coordination is that given that these individuals have a lot of complex needs across a lot of domains, given that it's manifesting in such a way that it's posing a risk to the community and to themselves, generally a number of services will be involved. If it's a small case, it'll be 1 or 2, maybe it'd be like a school and a counsellor, let's say on a very simple end of an intervention. And on a complex side of an intervention, which I'll go through on my case study, you'll see 7 plus 8, 9 different providers all working together. Service coordination is about making sure that everybody's role is really clear, holding people accountable to a sort of a plan. And it's also about making sure that there might be gaps in that service which are causing huge barriers. Obviously, our clients present with quite confronting behaviors. So part of it is about helping the services contextualize those behaviors and make sure that they can work safely and effectively with the client. And sometimes the service might not be exactly what the client needs. Like we've said, we've got a weird sort of presentation. A lot of it might be subclinical disability needs. So, for example, if you're sending an occupational therapist who's used to helping people with really acute disability needs around mobilization, eating, and toileting, to get them to work with an individual to work through a shopping budget and those more high-level stuff requires a little bit of finessing and support. Supervision is another part, which is obviously making sure that everyone feels safe and they've got support as they navigate the sort of service world of this client. And obviously the capacity building is that some organizations might need some extra training and stuff just so that they can do their bits of work. So that's the part that the inclusion support program leads. And then obviously we have a seat at the table in any sort of security and compliance conversation. So obviously if our clients are engaging in really risky and dangerous behavior, we have a responsibility to make sure that the police and the security agencies are informed of that. And obviously, if we've got clients who are on legal orders, it's critical that if they're breaching those orders, that we're also, participating in those compliance discussions as well, which is super tricky. We've got a mixture of allied health professionals, mostly social workers, with a handful of psychologists and an occupational therapist sort of in the mix. And then we have a lot of policy and program staff who help us coordinate all of the training and the community engagement and the policy and the briefings and all that sort of stuff. And what this all leads to is we're not a de-radicalization program. So we can't measure what people believe or how much they believe it, but we can sort of observe and measure the things that they do and their ability to do so. And so we try to stay in that behavior-based world of intervention instead of focusing too much on beliefs. So obviously, before I sort of go into this, I'll just speak really briefly about, I guess, some of the problems of how do we have an evidence-based approach in CVE and how that's informed the way that we've designed the inclusion support program. So there's a lot of you who are involved in terrorism research or have some understanding of that will understand. There's a few key things I just want to touch on. And obviously, I won't dig in too deep because we're not talking about terrorism research too much, but obviously there's problems in defining terrorism. A lot of you will be familiar with some of that in the literature. It's an enduring challenge since, the entire 20th century. And obviously it's gotten more difficult after September 11th and this more influx of terrorism research. Obviously we need to define a term in order to research it because it provides us our scope and our variables that we're looking at. So not having a clear definition makes terrorism a really tricky thing to research. And instead of digging into that, I guess I'll just say that there's a South Australian in the paper who possessed some extremist materials. He would be a terrorist offender because he's broken something it's a state-based terror offense. So he's a terrorist. Obviously, the Lint Cafe siege, in some bits and pieces, Monas is considered to be a terrorist. And then, of course, somebody like Ben Breaker is also considered a terrorist. And so if you were writing a paper about terrorists, those three people would come into your data set, and that really complicates the research because they're quite different presentations and experiences. Then there's, again, going into some of the literature reviews around terrorism research broadly, as we know that terrorism research is really tricky. A lot of people who are terrorists die in the act of terrorism, so they're difficult to research or study, difficult to empirically study it because we can't do blind studies and all those sorts of things. A lot of terrorism research is based on interviews or secondhand case studies and all that sort of stuff. So the quality of data is brought into question, and these is all compounded and it grows. And so what we land on in evidence-based terrorism interventions is that the more we find out, the less we know, and we have this really heterogeneous profile of what a terrorist is. And that's really tricky for us as practitioners because when we're looking to the evidence to sort of understand where we stand and what we can do, we're quite compromised in the sort of in that space. So our response to that is just to be focused back on tailored individual interventions, tailored individual assessments, and just sort of seeing what we get and working from there, which sounds simple, but it makes it difficult when we're trying to sort of contribute to and build upon a methodology or a community of practice of terrorism and violent extremist interventions. So what we do broadly to counter all of those problems that I just said is, first of all, we want our clients to be included in their community, included in their family. We want them to develop some kind of pro-social identity and purpose. Obviously, if they're involved in violent extremism or if they're sort of heading that way, will tend to see them as being isolated, disconnected from community, disconnected from family, and with an identity that's antisocial, usually tied up in some kind of weird ideas. We understand that in order for someone to be pro-social and to join their community, they actually have to have their own individual world under control. So we need to figure out what's going on for that person. What are their needs? Are their needs being met? Are they resilient? Are they capable? Are they successful? Do they have the ability to be successful? And we focus on doing that through not only their sort of acute functional needs, and then after we've got those needs under control, we'll work into building their social skills, their ability to make connections, and their actual ability to join the community. So that's our really broad theory of change, is to get people included, hence inclusion support program. So the way that we do that is we sort of break down what a client is, what they're coming to us for. So I use this sentence. It's kind of like the thing it's the most common thing I say. I say it in every presentation. So all behavior is an individual's best attempt at the time to meet their needs with the resources they have in the environment that they're in. But broadly speaking, if someone's behaving in a way that constitutes a terrorist offense or constitutes an at-risk behavior in this field, we would theorize that that's their best attempt at the time to meet their needs, and the resource that they have is that behavior. So let's say that behavior is collecting and sharing extremist materials. That's the behavior they have. What need are they trying to meet with that behavior? Are they trying to connect to people? Are they trying to stand out? Are they trying to be special? Are they trying to be powerful? They have some need that they're trying to meet, and the only way they can meet it is through this weird, really maladaptive presentation. And obviously our theory is that if they had better resources, if they had a better, more comfortable way to meet that need, they would do that. And so our job is not to focus so much on their behavior, because we can't make them change what they're doing all the time, but we can sort of offer and build their capacity with more resources. We can make some modifications to their environment as well. So what sits behind that, to go one level deeper, is I keep talking about this functional deficit, this sort of disability focus on our work, is like what that translates to is you have some kind of disability need, whether it's subclinical or not. What that means in simple terms is that you are unable to be successful. All right. So if you're going through life and your particular presentation, your clinical presentation means that you can't budget, that you can't plan a meal, that you can't organize your day, that you can't sort of get your life together, it generally means that you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, and you're not having pro-social connections, really critically, those three things. And what that generally means overall over the period of weeks, months, years, is you're unable to be successful. You have goals, you think you're capable of things, you're not achieving those goals, you're unsuccessful, but you don't really know why. And that causes distress. It makes you distressed, it makes you feel shame that you're not good enough, and all of those sorts of things. And obviously, you've got that simmering away at the time. On your worst day, you're already feeling all of those shame and nasty feelings. You become acutely distressed, and that's where those behaviors are going to start popping out, those really problematic behaviors. And if you've got, on top of this, if you've got these kind of disability presentation, these functional deficits, it's fair to say that you probably don't have very high distress tolerance. So when you become distressed, you don't tolerate it well, again, making you more likely to behave in this really maladaptive way. So down the bottom there, it's you've got this constant and significant distress at being not successful. You're not very tolerant of distress in general. And so what that's popping out in is these really maladaptive behaviors. So again, really reinforcing that what we try to do is how can we increase distress tolerance? How can we lower that constant shame by giving people better resources to be successful? And we hope that the result of that is that those behaviors go away or become less severe. And I don't need to go into this, but obviously what that means is we're really focused on behaviors and not beliefs. So all of this is driving us towards that concept.
Thanks, John. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit now about how we kind of do that. And I'm going to kind of run through and kind of rehash some of the stuff John's talked about in a bit more, the how-to way. But I guess just to re-emphasize this point, that we aren't aiming to be a de-radicalization program. Instead, we're really aiming to create new patterns of engagement and really strengthen that in that sort of a way. So first of all, I just want to kind of break down a little bit this statement that John's spoken about in those individual aspects. So when we're talking about violent extremist related behaviour, I think everyone in the room is quite familiar with what that may look like. And again, as John spoke about, we're really assuming this is a way for them to communicate something that is happening for them, whether that be a way for them to cope, to avoid, to arising from their experiences, whatever that may be, at a time when something has been triggered, so a key response and event, and we're very curious about what the timing of that may be, with an understanding of what the needs are. So what's the why? What are they hoping this behaviour will help them to achieve? Within a context of resources, and often this plays a lot into our concepts in relation to both need but also risk in terms of what their capacity is, what their mental health status may be, what their broader psychosocial wellbeing may be. And what are the aspects of their environment that either A, act as additional risk factors or additional needs we need to look at in terms of peer group or school or home environments, but also potentially protective factors. So where are these behaviours not occurring? What are the change points in that context we can look at as well? So our broad aim is really therefore to provide our clients with better resources to meet their needs so that they're able to kind of communicate those needs in a more pro-social effective way, and that they have the resources to connect with and participate more effectively in the community to change some of those levels that we just spoke about. So we work across multiple different domains within the inclusion support program and within the ISP. So we see our stakeholders as not just individuals, but also their families. We look at family as in a very kind of broad sense of who that person may see as their family. We also work at a community level. So a lot of our work is around raising awareness, doing functions such as Pick Out Hate, where we do a soccer tournament in the community to really increase awareness, connectivity, comfortableness with police seeking help, that kind of thing. And we also work at really increasing the capacity of service providers to feel more comfortable and confident and aware of these kind of behaviours, to do a lot more of that diversionary early intervention work. So what that looks like on a very programmatic level is our 5-stage model. So that is to identify, understand, design, collaborate, and to evaluate. So for us to identify that, and I know that there's kind of been looking at some of the questions in the chat while John's been speaking. So for us, identifying is both A, building an awareness and educating the community. And within this, it's always a bit of a Goldilocks scenario, because in many ways, the more we educate and the more we speak to the community about early warning signs, the more it can create a over caution or over awareness, or a tendency for people to see behaviours as more problematic or vilify behaviours more than they need to. However, we want to make sure that we are getting the right people through the door. So we do a lot of work with education, with community groups about how they can look at those vulnerability signs, but really thinking for them about what are the referral pathways of that. And that doesn't necessarily mean us. That could be referral to a local mental health agency, referral for various assessments, community organisations, etc. We also look at how we can create really clear and fast-track referral pathways and have a really structured, consistent eligibility criteria that is really transparent to people about how we are making those decisions. And that's another benefit of us being in the ENU, is we have really clear clinical governance around when we do and don't step in and what the circumstances of that should be. So once we have determined that they are eligible for our program, our next focus is then on understanding what those needs may be and how we can help them to meet those needs in the most appropriate way. So that, as you would imagine, involves us meeting with the client and getting their take on things, getting a good understanding of what they perceive their needs to be, which may be very different to what other people think that person's needs may be. And we also ask them for consent to speak to various different agencies, and we try and take as broad a scope as we can about the different agencies we speak to really get a holistic picture of what's going on for that individual, what's been tried, why hasn't it worked, what have been some good ways to sort of seek engagement, when have things worked well, as well as when things have not worked as well. And with that all combined, we then conduct a psychosocial assessment to really think about and formulate how a client's mental health, their occupational functioning, any other needs may be playing a part in how they're presenting behaviourally, as well as working out protective factors, what gaps there may be in assessment, what questions we still have that we need to sort of work our way through in terms of how we can design an appropriate intervention for them. So then our design factor really considers these 4 different key areas. So one is looking at what are the presenting behaviours of concern. So what are the things that we're really hoping we can work towards minimising the risk of or change how they're presenting. What are the barriers of service provision? So why is it that mainstream services aren't able to work with this individual? Why is it that the school perhaps isn't able to have the rapport to continue to work with them to engage better in a school context or have conversations with them? We then look at, are there some additional recommendations that have been made from assessments that we may have got as part of that psychosocial assessment? So we may have determined that an occupational therapist assessment may be useful, or as John mentioned, a forensic psychologist assessment may be useful. So we look at all those recommendations and go, are there pieces of this puzzle that we either A, need to get more info on, or that this may really change how mainstream services could be responding to this, and how do we build up their capacity to better deal with that? So a classic example may be one of our assessments in the assess phase or understand phase would have been, this person is neurodiverse, but the school is perhaps not aware of that, the teacher may not be aware of that. So part of it may be about us working with the occupational therapist and the psychologist to help the teacher understand how that presents for them and what are some of the key ways they can better interact and engage with them. And the other part we do, which is part of the service coordination role of the ISP and ENU, is work out what is the most effective way for each party to be involved in the care team. How can we facilitate really cohesive, collaborative conversations, goal setting with a holistic view of the person in mind. So really that's about us trying to avoid silo models of working, of one agency having this goal and they're working in this direction, one agency having another goal and working on another area, and not necessarily understanding how those may be contradictory and getting in the way, not being complementary of each other. So we are really big on role clarity, really big on being as transparent as we can about what the restrictions and capacity of each agency is to work more effectively with that person and their family. So part of that, I guess, and part of the design is really thinking about these 3 factors. And John spoke about this a little bit when he was talking before. And for us, we really think about good program design often looks at these 3 areas for individuals. So potential and purpose, belonging and connection, and safety and security. And there's not a unique pattern here where we go, we have to do safety and security first, and then we move on to belonging and connection. They're very transient, very adaptive and flexible within each other, and sometimes we focus on one and sometimes we focus on another, and often it's based on what the individual is most willing to work on with us first. But the broad idea here is that we can't really work on somebody's sense of kind of identity when they themselves may not necessarily be feeling safe and secure. So these are factors such as housing, physical health, mental health, employment, education. And so I guess a lot of this is around the fact that, as John mentioned, a lot of individuals who come through our program are really vulnerable. They often do have a lot of barriers, both in occupational capacity, but also due to sort of psychosocial factors, which mean that they may not be able to sustain ongoing stable housing. They may not know how to navigate independent living. They may not know how to take good care of themselves or who to ask for help in that sort of sense. And they may have significant barriers in terms of gaining and sustaining employment from that zone as well. And that some of that's about capability, sometimes that's about confidence, and sometimes that's about whether they've got the right people around them to help scaffold their ability to do these things and function in this way. So some of the parts we look at in terms of recommendation are around how we can look at how to support these factors to ensure that the person is coming to their psychology appointment, which might be focused more on belonging and identity, with a really robust starting block of being as physically and psychologically healthy as they can, and really starting to maintain an engagement with society in terms of housing and employment and education as they can, to really build up their protective factors of what their life can be, and really minimise the enormity of their ideology and their related behaviours and often social connections that they have in their life, to sort of bring up or increase the volume that their housing or employment or other aspects may have in terms of what their life looks like. So the next domain around that is belonging and connection. And so this for us is about factors such as who are their friendship groups, how do they navigate building relationships, what do their social skills look like, how do their family relationships look, who else in their community do they trust, connect with, relate to, and how can we really make them feel like they are able to participate in a way that is healthy and safe, but also in line with their broader values. So we look at here a number of different support partners that can help us work our way through this. And some of the other unique aspects of the work we do is looking at existing programs that are in youth justice or are in corrections or in other services that help build up social skills and particularly family relationships. So one of the things we know is that there is emerging research that people who are engaged in violent extremism or have extreme ideology may also be at future risk for domestic violence or family violence or relational violence. So we often refer them to the KIND program, which is a adolescent dating and family violence program, which focuses really on building up pro-social skills and relational skills and emotional regulation skills within relationships. And that really helps us to see those areas build up so that the person starts to have the skills, toolkit, and confidence to have really strong pro-social relationships. And finally, we look at potential and purpose. So this is really about, does this person have the self-efficacy, the confidence, the self-esteem to sustain employment, to sustain healthy relationships, to work effectively to pursue their goals in a meaningful way. So many people look at this as the last kind of bit that we would look at, but often for us, this can be a massive barrier we need to work at first to build up their belief in themselves that they can work towards independent housing, that they can go back into employment or go back into a schooling environment. So a lot of these things are looked at holistically, and often it doesn't fit neatly into one box or the other. Often we will, for example, get a psychologist or a mentor involved who'll be doing a bit of each of those boxes, but this is part of our way of looking at how we start to map out service design. And then we collaborate. So part of, as we've spoken about a lot, is about that service coordination. So we work out who needs to be at the table, who is already at the table that we need to bring in closer, and who else may not be there that we need to fund and broker to be part of the service team. We think about who we need to select and how we can support those service providers. So we may, for example, get a psychologist involved, but many psychologists aren't familiar with this area of work. So that involves how can we supervise, support, train them up to feel more confident in their transferable skills to work with this cohort. And also building the capacity with a lot of other mainstream services who are a critical part of the care design. So building up education teams capacity, CAMS's capacity, sometimes Department of Child Protection, but it may also be community organisations that we really need to build up their capacity and confidence and comfort in working with this cohort and these individuals. And finally, then we evaluate. So we look at, with all these supports in place, how have we met in terms of those broad clinical recommendations? So we go back to that assessment, to that design phase. Where did we hope we'll be? And are we any closer to getting there? Do we need to readjust what our goals are? Sometimes we realise later down the track we need more information. Some of those questions are still unanswered. And when we feel like the intervention meets those criteria, so we feel like the individual is being well supported by services, so not necessarily that they've got no needs or no risks, but rather for us that we feel like those mainstream services can effectively manage those needs and risks, we start to transition them out of the inclusion support program and have a lot of faith that mainstream services and supports can either A, continue to work effectively with that individual, or B, come back to the ISP if need be for a re-referral and re-engagement with our program. Over to you, John.
I'll just get you to skip this slide, Lauren. That I just want to dig into this case study. We have some principles of practice, which are, I think will be fairly familiar to people in the room, which I can go through if we have time, but I'd rather just run through how this works. The slide for our case study is really basic because I wanted to speak to it. So I'll just talk about a client of ours, Peter. So going through those 5 stages of the program. So first of all, he's identified to us. He comes to us as a terrorist offender. He came to us at the point of being charged, and he was then remanded. He was on community bail, and now he's serving a court-ordered home detention sentence. Lots of terrorist offences, all on the state legislation, so no federal terror offences. So we have at our Summary Offences Act a number of different offences and some various other bits of ledge. But he got done with manufacture of an explosive device, possession of a prohibited weapon, manufacturing prohibited weapon, ammunition without a license, and documents for a terrorist offence, and possession of extremist materials. Not to dive into it too much, but really scary individual on paper. Although digging into those charges, I think the explosive device was in its early stages and more of a tinkering project than a sort of a really scary device. Manufacturing prohibited weapon was around knives and blades and those sorts of things. Possession of prohibited weapon was around laser pointers and bits and bobs. So real hodgepodge of different bits and pieces there. No member of a right-wing extremist group. That's how this person comes to us. So immediately we went into that understanding phase. So obviously very scary individual on paper, and the sort of, it's very constant in the program that we'll meet people and you get something different than what you've read about on paper. Obviously, you know, the benefit of our program is we can spend hours and hours with people sort of getting a sense of who they are and what their needs are. Whereas obviously in those investigation phases, even a forensic assessment being done in a court-ordered environment, you're going to only get a short amount of time with a person running through a sort of structured assessment or a structured interview in case of policing. So we get a lot of time to get a feel for the person. And then over the course of that, so in this understand phase, we might link them with a service straight away. Obviously, we're a small team, got 50 clients. I think we've only got, we've got 5 or 6 people in our clinical team. So we can't be spending multiple hours per week with clients. We don't get too involved in case management. So in this case, we funded a case management response from a local agency, our Offender Aid and Rehabilitation Service. And they were spending 3 to 5 hours a week, and they were the main point of contact. Huge benefits there. They're non-government, so better ability to build trust and get a sense of what was going on for that person. Became pretty clear that there were some concerns there and a psychologist was needed. So we engaged a psychologist, and then it became clear that, you know, there was a query on an ADHD diagnosis. There was a query on an autism diagnosis. We also had the benefit that because he'd been through a court process, there was already a forensic assessment that had a number of recommendations for us to go through. And being that autism was something that was diagnosed there, we also got an occupational therapist to go in to his home. Another benefit of being on Home D, observe him in his sort of home environment, and wrote a really comprehensive occupational therapy assessment. So we have now oodles and oodles of information, courts and psych assessments and ASD assessments and clinical notes. We've got consent to share and discuss some of these things. Ultimately, we end up with 20 or 30 different recommendations, ranging from this guy needs a house cleaner because he's living in squalor. He's got 3 kids in the house. A girlfriend is on Home D. It's all pretty crazy. He's really got very low distress tolerance, becomes very overwhelmed. Obviously, that contributes to his messy house. He's a very chaotic person, very hard to focus on all of the different goals. And obviously, we found that once we got lots of services and people involved, everyone's trying to do everything, best intentioned. And so that service coordination role has been really important, is to say, to this service, we need you to do these specific things and not do these other things because that service is doing those things. And really, it was down to the level of detail with this person that, we got the case management organization to work through a whiteboard with him, make sure he's got a daily routine, thinking about when he's doing breathing exercises to sort of manage his like acute stress, make sure he's got a routine on home detention, so he's got some sense of purpose and structure to his life. Really simple stuff, and really just making sure everyone's got a really clear role. And then obviously building upon every success with more complex and nuanced interventions around different therapeutic, psychological interventions. He's also got chronic back pain. I think from the way that I'm talking, you can identify that there's lots and lots of domains for interventions with this person, and we can only do a few things at a time, especially given his low tolerance for variety, given his set of conditions. So that collaboration has been really important, a lot of case conferencing, a lot of leadership required from us to make sure that everyone's doing the right thing. And also, given his really acute functional needs, actually working to get the occupational therapist to supervise the case manager. So obviously the case manager's got the most contact with him. A big thing that we can do is make that case manager to be, I guess, nuanced and thoughtful in the way that the occupational therapist needs it to be. I hope that makes sense. I'm rushing a little bit, but when we come to evaluate this intervention, and it's ongoing, so this is not one where we've got to a place where we feel like everything's working really, really well, but we'll know when we get there by the fact that each clinical assessment we've got listed out on a plan. That's the plan that we run our case conferences around. Every organization, and in this case there's 6, has their own recommendations that they have ownership over, leadership over, and we can sort of say, red, yellow, green light, how is that going? How is his daily routine going? Yes, he's adhered to his daily routine every day for the past 4 weeks, or no, the whiteboard's different every time we come in. He's completely stressed and chaotic. His house is a mess. We can get a sense of whether supports are in place for each recommendation that's been made. And so, as Lauren sort of spoke about, the real metric for success is not that the risk is entirely gone or all of the needs are met and we've now got a fully functional member of society who's sort of joined the masses, but more that we've got somebody who's got supports in place for all of the different needs in their domains. Those supports know what they're doing, and they importantly know what they're not doing to create room for the other providers to do their role. Once all of that is sort of humming along in a nice way, the ISP can sort of step backwards from that individual and be less concerned about their level of service meeting their needs. So I know that's a rush, but I'm very conscious of time. I want to get to some of those questions, so we'll leave it there.
Thank you, John. And I have put up emails here that if you would like to email either of us and ask questions outside of this Q&A, or if there's something else you want to kind of expand on, please feel free to get in touch.
Thank you both. That's the most fascinating discussion. We do have now 10 minutes for Q&A, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. And just going to start with a comment that we've had, and this is that the heterogeneity of TERRAS is an outcome of the research and not a limitation in the research. However, it's unclear what this means for interventions. Given your expertise in this area, what are your thoughts on this comment?
I think for me that I think it is definitely, I could take your comment, agree with comment in many ways. I think one of the strengths of our model is that it is based on the fact that every individual is different and is a very individualized program. So one of the things we're really proud of is that we don't have a standard, this person comes in, the standard response is blah, 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 blah. We really look at the individual and what makes that individual unique. In fact, that's what we're most curious about. Often for us, we joke that the thing that we find least interesting about an individual is their ideology, and what's much more interesting is their broader needs, their history, what's kind of brought them to that point, what's the environment they live in, what does their resource profile look like. So for us, we design interventions based on individuals, and so that factor of what the research is telling us about this group and how different each individual is works really effectively with our program model. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I just thanks John for that comment. And obviously, I know you've done a lot of work on terrorism research methodology, and I hope I didn't butcher that in summary. And obviously, I agree with the comment. And I suppose we're trying to sort of state that the research is great. There's two implications of that. One is that it's hard to be evidence-based in violent extremist intervention because of those outcomes. But also it's also a challenge for us to say, like, how can we meaningfully contribute to the data set? What does that look like? And I think for us, what we're hoping with over the next couple of years is to have a sort of to contribute to a clinical understanding of individuals that find themselves in these programs, and hope that that provides something new and fresh to that discourse.
The tailored nature of the work that you're doing is very, very interesting. It's also very labor intensive from the way that you've described it. Do you think that given these aspects of your program, there's scope to expand the program, or are there underlying principles that could be applied more broadly?
I think there's a few kind of factors within that. I think we're quite South Australia is in a really interesting context, that our goalpost for who is and isn't in our program is really fluid in terms of that. But because we see ourselves as a program that both works at that tertiary end of intervention, but also works in that diversionary state in terms of working a lot more in early intervention, diversion, particularly for young people that may be showing real warning signs or risk factors, but may not meet threshold of some of our other state and territory colleagues in terms of an intervention approach. I think it means that what we've been able to see is the fact that a lot of the aspects of this, in terms of looking at needs-based delivery, in terms of those factors around safety, security, purpose, relationships, etc., are often a really fantastic lens to look at a lot of different aspects of challenging behaviour. So I think there is a lot of potential for how it could be applied to other groups of vulnerability, other groups where there is a really strong behavioural characteristic and strong social connections that inform that behaviour. So I think there is potential there. Have we yet explored them with different populations? No. Are we thinking about it? Yes, would be my answer to that.
And to answer sort of a different part of that question, in the early parts of the program, when it was a lot smaller and we were sort of feeling things out, obviously, I was doing clinical work personally, and I was interacting with the clients of the program, which I do almost none of that work today. But I've experienced, I guess, firsthand that idea that it's also very time intensive to have conversations around what people believe and how that manifests, and to kind of, when you get trapped in this focus on ideology and belief and those sorts of things, which was, I guess, a misstep upon reflection of the early run of the program. And actually, when you go into this tailored assessment, it's very structured. It actually makes things tasky, and there's a lot more momentum to it, because you build the rapport, you've got the rapport, get the assessment, got the assessment, got the recommendations, got a clear list of things to do them, reassess, you've kind of got momentum. Whereas, like, obviously, extremists aren't people who are well put together. Well, a lot of the time their ideologies don't make sense to themselves, let alone us. So I find actually that part of, or that flavor of the work, to be really labor intensive. And also on that, if we're working, the two examples we used were an occupational therapist assessment and let's say a forensic psychological assessment. These are pretty accepted assessments. They're accepted by courts, by law enforcement. They're sort of things that people understand and are familiar with. And that makes our decision-making process very defensible. So let's say, for example, Peter, the client in the case study, let's say he continues to be a risk, say that he reoffends, and somebody says, well, John, what did the ISP do for Peter? You didn't de-radicalize him. And it's like, well, no, we did get him assessed, and we had all of those recommendations being met or attempted to being met. And we can demonstrate that in a really defensible way, which I think takes some of that anxiety. Obviously, I think in CVE intervention, there's a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of anxiety that goes around that. So it provides a bit of comfort in that sense too.
Absolutely.
So now just to run through some of these, just conscious of your time. So if I can, I'll take over your chairing and run through a few of these questions around it. So hopefully we've kind of answered for Brent around the functional needs in terms of us both doing a psychosocial assessment and also doing funding additional assessments if we need to, in terms of what some of those functional needs may be through both OT and psych assessments. So hopefully we've answered that. Sorry, I'm just running through these quickly now, and I'm going to answer some, and then some I might throw to John, just conscious of your time. In terms of how we connect to primary care providers in the referral system, our program, we accept referrals into the ISP from any agency really that is an agency as opposed to an individual. We do have methods in terms of checking, I guess, if something comes through about whether it's a reasonable referral before we would dig into it. And a lot of our referrals do come from education and police as the primary referral sources to our program. But we do a lot of work in terms of connecting with primary care practitioners, mainly allied health professionals in the community, to help build up their trust and their willingness to work effectively with us. The program has been up and running for a while, but it's gone through a lot of iterations. So it used to be quite famously just the John Young program. It was just John and he ran the whole show. And over the last 4 years, we've kind of grown in terms of the team, in terms of the scope of the program and where it looks. So when it was just John, it was the youth inclusion program and it just focused on young people. And since that time, we've expanded into adults and really expanded our capacity in both training and education and policy, as well as the intervention work. And a few of these, John, you probably better to answer than me, but the last two I'll answer is the evaluation phase. We don't really necessarily look at how protective factors or reduction in risk as a key factor of how we evaluate the success of our program. And part of that is because we're much more focused on need than we are on risk. And so we don't ourselves lead risk assessment and therefore don't evaluate ourselves against a risk assessment. But what we do look at is this person's needs being better met by existing services and the system? Do they have the right responses in place and have the key recommendations of what those gaps are that are creating ongoing need and risk? Are they being met and responded to? So that's kind of what we look at in terms of success. And as John said, is the system working really effectively together? And finally, I'd say we our client age range, so we work from 10 up and have always been a youth-focused program. So quite a few of our cohort are under the age of 25 and have had quite a few school-aged young people in the program. John, there's a few more that I've not answered in that rapid-fire response.
Yeah. Well done, Lauren. Good rapid fire. Ahmad, nice to see you there. Obviously familiar with your work around distrust in CVE programs. Being that we're an individual, a tailored program for individuals, distrust isn't something we come across. We're not public facing, so there's not a sense of what our program is. That's really different, perhaps a UK system, which is a bit more public facing, a bit more in the media. There's obviously Australian programs in other states that have had a bit more media attention than us. So we kind of are a little bit lucky in the sense that we haven't had that attention. So we don't have a reputation that we potentially need to defend. And also, you know, as you can see, like we're sort of plainclothes human services folk. We engage people from the NGO sector, and that does a lot to build trust and maintain trust and rapport with our clients. So that's kind of how we get around that.
And we also really have the luxury, I guess, within that of focusing of being a service that often they want to engage in. So often, because we are able to come at that with that safety and security lens of, as I said, the needs that the police may come to us with, or the parents may come is going, we want this person to stop doing X behaviour. What the young person, for example, may say they want is, I want a driver's license and to get a job so I can be independent. And so we can really focus on how can we use carrots to facilitate really good engagement and build up trust and rapport before we start working on some things that may be more confronting for them to work through. So we luckily can really look at meeting them where they're at, and focusing on their needs as well as what the sector tells us is the needs of that individual.
I think that's it. Thanks so much, Nell.
Oh,
Thanks,
you
Nell.
both.
Sorry for taking over.
No, you did a fantastic job. And look, we're just so lucky to have you both here talking about the work that you're doing. It's absolutely fascinating. And there are so many insights to be gained from what you're doing for both practice and for research. So thank you so much. Please join us for the April AVERT webinar, which is taking place on the 18th of April. And you can sign up through our website. And for the April webinar, Jade Hutchinson of Macquarie University and Groningen University will present the far right online ecosystem, how a network of platforms and devices shape far-right online extremism. You can sign up for our mailing list to keep up to date with all of the future AVERT events and webinars, and you can do that at avert.net.au. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lauren. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.